It took a couple more years down the road, but the major trend came about, and the market in housing crashed, and it was clear there was a bubble. So you basically have a situation where that part of the movie, that story wasn't told. It wasn't told how the Fed was supporting it by their research, by the money they printed. And if that money wasn't printed, you have to ask yourself, how could you possibly have so many loans go out there in the subprime market and to people of questionable means to actually borrowing for mortgages? Where did this money come from? And it's very simple. The Federal Reserve created the money. And if they did not create the money, that would never that crash would never have occurred. There would have never been such a bubble.
Right. Well, let's walk people through this, because we did get a lot of very simple explanations, I think, or easy to follow explanations of what was happening there in the subprime mortgage markets in the movie itself. But of course, we didn't get that breakdown of the Fed and how the Fed's rates control really the underlying basis for those markets. So let's walk people through that and talk about how the rates got down to where they were, why they were held there for so long, how that created the bubble, and then ultimately what resulted from that.
Yeah, it's not really as much the actual interest rate, because you can have periods when interest rates are way, way down like they are now, and you don't necessarily have a bubble and booming real estate market. You sort of have it coming back now from the crash, but it's still not at levels that it was prior to the crash when interest rates were a lot higher. So it's not the key isn't the interest rate level as much as it is how much money is the Federal Reserve pumping into the banking system, which allows the banking system to loan more money out. And the problem is, if the Fed could just print money forever, you could have a bubble forever. But the problem comes in that you start to get inflation heating up, prices are starting to climb, people are starting to get antsy about all that, and the Federal Reserve gets concerned, and they start slowing down the amount of money they're pumping in. And when they slow down that money, you don't have the same amount of money propping it all up, you're going to have a crash. It's sort of like a game of musical chairs. When the music's going around and there's enough chairs for everybody, that's fine. But if you take one chair away, that's going to be a problem for someone. You take more chairs away, more problems. And with the Federal Reserve, what they do is they pump more money in and more money in and more money in, and then suddenly they slow down and stop printing the money, so it can't prop up all those mortgages that are out there. If somebody wants to sell, they can't find somebody who has new money to come in to buy it at the higher prices, and that's how you see the collapse.
Well, we know that since the collapse, the quantitative easing world has arisen, and we've got that reality where the Fed has been using that mechanism to pump money into the banks and to basically buy their toxic assets off of them. But what was the mechanism by which they were pumping money into the banking system before that point?
Yeah, essentially, the Federal Reserve uses three types of tools to control the money supply. They can control the interest rates. They can control what's known as the reserve requirement, how much banks are required to hold based upon the reserves they have. And then they do something called open market operations. Generally, what they've done with open market operations is they have bought treasury bills. So all I consider these quantitative easings is sort of a subset of the open market operations. They shifted a little bit, and they went to direct bailouts of the banksters, the major banks that were involved, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, people like that. And what they did is, instead of just buying treasury securities, they went and they started buying securities that were held by the banks, the various mortgage securitization packages. And that's what caused what Bernanke called the quantitative easing, or part of the quantitative easing. But it wasn't really a new tool. That's kind of misleading. And the Federal Reserve can do a lot of damage without ever doing another quantitative easing. But that's just sort of a subset of the general tools they use. And the most important one is, again, the open market operations, where the Federal Reserve, specifically the New York Federal Reserve Bank, operates a trading desk where they go and trade with primary dealers. Those are selected banks and other trading organizations, and they buy and sell securities. For the most part, they're buying on net, and they generally tend to buy short-term securities. During this Bernanke period of quantitative easing, they bought long-term securities for a while, and then, most important, they bought some of these securitized investments that the banks had. But if people are looking, I see a lot of commentary out there saying, well, there's going to be another quantitative easing, or watch out for the next quantitative easing. The Fed can go in there and do all kinds of damage without announcing any other kind of quantitative easing. All they have to do is just go in and buy Treasury bills, and like they do on a regular basis, and they can do a lot of damage.
Hard to represent that in a movie.
Right.
This is the underlying problem of the narrative.
James, I don't think they necessarily had to go into that kind of detail, but they should have simply pinpointed that the Federal Reserve was printing money at that time. Because what they did, and they actually closed with this, is they showed pictures of different banks to really give, in bankers, there was a picture of Jamie Dimon, who's the head of JP Morgan Securities, JP Morgan Chase, and he's one of the top banksters, and he doesn't deserve a pass, but he's not the key element in the story. The key element is the Federal Reserve, and it's not banks. That's the sort of inaccurate impression that was given, that it was sort of all banks. That's the impression you're left with, that the banks were making these horrific mortgages, and that therefore we need controls on the banks. That's really not what was going on. It was the Federal Reserve providing all this money, and the bankers feeling comfortable that the Federal Reserve would come in to back them up if things went wrong, and that's exactly what happened.
Well, to the film's credit, I think the only mention that I could remember in the film, from my viewing, of government regulatory oversight or lack of oversight over the process itself was the mention of the woman who had left the SEC and gone directly into a job with the banks that she was supposedly regulating. So it certainly didn't seem that the movie was making an argument for regulation per se. It just wasn't really making the argument the way it perhaps should have been made.
Yeah, if you look at the movie right through to the end, the closing minutes are all about showing the banksters and really just giving that impression. And I saw it in a couple of reviews after the movie was out, that's what people, sort of the sense they got, that, well, if the banks are doing all this, making all these bad loans, then what we need to do is get in there and put some limitations on the banks so that they won't make these bad loans again. But that's not where the core problem is. The core problem is the Federal Reserve, and you can put all the restrictions on the banks you want as far as loaning out in the subprime market or different sectors, and the money's, if the Fed is printing money, it's going out there somewhere. It may not be in that sector, but you have to stop the Federal Reserve from printing the money. That's really the key and the problem.
But also at the end of the movie, Mark Baum comes to the realization that of the moral hazard argument, that they did it because they knew they would be bailed out at taxpayer expense. They didn't care. They were just, So I think it was obviously, a question of, yes, greed, but also the underlying part of that is the fact they knew the government would not let them fail.
Right. Of course, that is true in general, but it didn't work for Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns.
Right.
And for Lehman Brothers, it was just a case where I think the people at Lehman Brothers, the top personnel, were people that sort of were being kicked out of the insider club. and they were sort of taken down. As a matter of fact, when Lehman Brothers went down and then Bear Stearns went down, after those two went down, the next one that looked like it had trouble was going to be Citigroup, and I wrote at economicpolicyjournal.com, my website, that now there will be a bailout. There's no way they're letting Citigroup down, and of course that's what they protected.
Wasn't Citigroup from the ashes of National City Bank back in the day?
Oh yeah, from the old days.
Right.
Yeah. But the key really was that Robert Rubin, who was Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration, was at that point running the bank as co-chairman or some position. It appeared he didn't really want the position, but he was kind of pushed into it. And then there's a famous call he made to Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke that showed up on Ben Bernanke's phone logs. And Rubin claimed that he was just calling Bernanke to tell him he was doing a great job. So there you go.
It would be funny, I suppose, if it wasn't, trillions of dollars of wealth and people being homeless at the end of it.
Right. Right.
Well, let's be optimistic then. Let's say that there are people out there, and I'm sure there are, who have seen this movie and are appalled or re-appalled at what happened and are looking for more answers about this and about what fundamentally is underlying this. I note that in your article, The Big Short, An Almost Great Movie, you start by saying that in addition to recommending this movie to people to see, you will also recommend they read Street Fighting at Wall and Abroad, an insider's tale of stock manipulation, and The Professional Commodity Trader, along with Peter Lynch books. Can you tell us about those resources?
Sure. Those are specifically aimed at people who sort of want to get involved in Wall Street. Those books are about how stocks are, to use a better word, manipulated. It's more for someone that really wants to look at the insider game. That's not going to give you the big picture stuff. My book, The Fed Flunks, where I give the speech at the Federal Reserve, and also report in there how I in real time on my economicpolicyjournal.com blog warned about the crisis that was developing, tends to give you more of a bigger picture. From there, you're getting into more technical books. There's a great book by Murray Rothbard, although it doesn't cover quantitative easing. It was written in the 80s, called The Mystery of Banking, which is excellent in explaining how the Federal Reserve actually pumps money into the system. So that's a really, really good book. One thing I would add, the surprises generally come in directions that most people don't expect. So everybody was buying into the mortgage market. I'd written pieces for a couple of years before the crash saying, I can't believe this. I was in a pizza shop and, guys were exchanging stories about how they're going to put on a second and third mortgage and then sell it and buy a new house. And I said, all these guys are going to lose and all that kind of stuff. But at that time, you couldn't talk to these people and tell them, say, look, watch out, the danger is there. Now the problem is, and there are very, very few people that believe this, that there's going to be a major new accelerating inflation that I see. And that's where you really have to pay attention. That's where the next danger is going to be, which means, the old inflation hedges, sort of like gold and silver and things like that, are very, very important to have at that time, when that inflation starts to develop. It was interesting that just this last week, gold closed up one day $65 an ounce, which is really a remarkable spike. And I don't think that's the last time we're going to see spikes of that size in gold. It might not happen right away, but maybe 6 months to 12 months down the road.
You mentioned the Fed Flunks and your speech at the Federal Reserve Bank, but people may not know the story of that. How did that come about? How did you get to speak at the New York Fed, and what did you tell them?